Hi, friend. Welcome to another episode of the Driven Introvert podcast. For the next few episodes, I will be sharing quotes and excerpts from some of my favorite books. I invite you to listen along as we pull insights from these authors for a more intentional and fulfilled life. This episode, I'm reading from A Promised Land by Barack Obama. No subtitles needed. Here's an excerpt. Sometime in high school, I started asking questions about my father's absence and my mother's choices, about how it was I'd come to live in a place where few people looked like me. A lot of the questions centered on race, but I wasn't only concerned with race. It was class as well. Growing up in Indonesia, I'd seen the yawning chasm between the lives of wealthy elites and impoverished masses. I had a nascent awareness of the tribal tensions in my father's country, the hatred that could exist between those who on the surface might look the same. I bore daily witness to the seemingly cramped lives of my grandparents, the disappointments they filled with TV and liquor, and sometimes a new appliance or car. I noticed that my mother paid for her intellectual freedom with chronic financial struggles and occasional personal chaos. And I became attuned to the not-so-subtle hierarchies among my prep school classmates, mostly having to do with how much money their parents had. And then there was the unsettling fact, despite whatever my mother might claim, the bullies, cheats, and self-promoters seemed to be doing quite well, while those who she considered good and decent people seemed to get screwed an awful lot. A lot of this pulled me in different directions. It was as if, because of the very strangeness of my heritage and the worlds I straddled, I was from everywhere and nowhere at once, a combination of ill-fitting parts, like a platypus or some imaginary beast confined to a fragile habitat, unsure of where I really belonged. And I sensed, without fully understanding why or how, that unless I could stitch my life together and situate myself along some firm axis, I might end up, in some basic way, living my life alone. I didn't talk to anyone about this, certainly not my friends or family. I didn't want to hurt their feelings or stand out more than I already did. But I did find refuge in books. The reading habit was my mother's doing, instilled early in my childhood. Her go-to move anytime I complained of boredom, or when she couldn't afford to send me to the international school in Indonesia, or when I had to accompany her to the office because she didn't have a babysitter. Go read a book, she would say, then come back and tell me something you learned. There were a few years when I lived with my grandparents in Hawaii while my mom continued her work in Indonesia and raised my younger sister Maya. Without my mother around to nag me, I didn't learn as much and my grades readily attested. Then, around 10th grade, that changed. I still remember going with my grandparents to a rummage sale at the Central Union Church across the street from our apartment and finding myself in front of a bin of old, hardcover books. For some reason, I started pulling out titles that appealed to me or sounded vaguely familiar. Books by Ralph Ellison and Langston Hughes, Robert Penn Warren, and Dostoevsky. I cannot pronounce that better. Lawrence and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Gramps, who was eyeing a set of used golf clubs, gave me a confused look when I walked up with my box of books. Planning to open a library? He asked. My grandmother shushed him, finding my sudden interest in literature admirable. Ever practical, she did suggest I might want to focus on my class assignments before digging into Crime and Punishment. I ended up reading all those books, sometimes late after I got home from basketball practice and a six-pack with my friends, sometimes after body surfing on a Saturday afternoon, seated alone in Gram's rickety old Ford Granada with a towel around my waist to avoid getting the upholstery wet. When I finished with the first set of books, I went to other rummage sales looking for more. Much of what I read I only dimly understood. I took to circling unfamiliar words to look up in the dictionary, although I was less scrupulous about decoding pronunciations. Deep into my 20s, I would note the meaning of words I couldn't pronounce. There was no system to this, no rhyme or pattern. I was like a young tinkerer in my parents' garage, gathering up old cathode ray tubes and bolts and loose wires, not sure what I'd do with any of it, but convinced it would prove handy once I figured out the nature of my calling. I absolutely love this book by Barack Obama. When I first read it, I was fascinated by his backstory and the experiences he had in life. And this particular section of the book really spoke to me because in a tiny way, I identify with that feeling of trying to find your place, trying to figure out where you belong, and trying to see how the seemingly disjointed parts of your life, of your experiences, the things you're learning, the things you're drawn to, will actually come together in a way to help you figure out the nature of your calling in life, right? I like that he said that without fully understanding why, he always felt that he had to stitch his life together and situate himself along some firm axis. Like he had to find his place. He had to find something that he could, in a way, live for. And I think that desire is in every one of us. To different degrees, some of us are more aware of our need to figure out the meaning of our lives, if I can be a little melodramatic in that way. And some of us are not as aware, or maybe we've pushed down that awareness, that hunger, that question, because we haven't yet found a way to answer them, and we are not comfortable with the uncertainty. We're not comfortable with the fact that we don't have answers to the big questions in life, right? If you're the kind of person that gets overwhelmed when you think about, gosh, what is the meaning of life? Like, where is this life going? Where is my life going? You will not want to dig deep into it, right? But if you're fairly comfortable with uncertainty, you will want to keep figuring it out. And I think that's what he's trying to say here. And I do believe that hopefully, I assume that he probably was someone who journaled and wrote down his thoughts at some point in his life. And it actually helps you process your thoughts and your feelings. This has certainly been my experience. And I just want to encourage you, if you're listening and you do have the big questions about life, maybe you're growing up and you're having kids of your own and you're wondering where all of this leads. You're looking into your kids' eyes and you're wondering, how do I raise them? Like, how am I going to do this? Or maybe you're wondering about your career and saying, where do I belong? Like, what am I going to do? Like, how do I make sense of this? Or maybe you're still so young and you're just stepping out, into life, so to speak, into adulthood. And you have so many questions about, which road to go down. I just want to encourage you and the fact that please be comfortable with uncertainty, because there is no, except from the Bible, there is no manual to life, so to speak. There is no pre-written guide to tell you this is exactly the way your life will turn out. You're going to figure it out. You have to be comfortable with tinkering. You know how he said he would just tinker in his parents' garage and has these bits and pieces of things that he doesn't even know what he's going to do with it, but he knows he'll figure it out. That's essentially the metaphor for life. Like, you don't know how the different experiences you're having, the different thoughts, the different disappointments, the different successes, the victories, the joys, the seemingly random things that are happening in life, you don't know how they're going to come together to help you figure out your call and to help you figure out where your life is going. But you have to be comfortable with the fact that you don't know. Be comfortable with that. And that's how you figure things out. That's how you figure things out. If you were not born with, even if you were born with an inheritance that meant you never had to work a day in your life, you still have to figure out your purpose, because this is how a lot of people who have a lot of resources but no direction and no purpose, mess up their lives. So you still have to figure things out, but be okay with not knowing. Be okay with slowly and methodically opening one page after the other of your life. Trying to jump to the last page, nobody can do that, and it only causes overwhelm and sometimes depression. So please hold on to that, the fact that you may not have all the answers today, but take it one day at a time. One day at a time. And there is no particular endpoint. Barack Obama became the president of the United States. He's not a president anymore. As far as I'm concerned, America is not quote unquote fixed. I don't know what you might think, but the problems of the country are not over. So there will always be another fight. There will always be a mountain to climb, there will always be something else to do, right? So don't be in a hurry. Don't be in a hurry to jump to the last page. Figure it out one day at a time and be okay with not knowing. Be okay with not having all the answers, but do what you can today. Put those bits and pieces together, tinker, try things, move things around. And then with time, you figure out what sticks. I really love this book. Of course, there's a lot of political stories in there, the things that happened when he became president and all that. But I find myself being drawn to those pages in the book where he really talked about his inner experiences, his inner world, because that's what shapes what happens on the outside. It's the things that you think, that you believe, that shapes where you're going and what you do on the outside. So I hope it encourages you as you go through life. And thanks so much for listening. If you have any insights that you want to share with me, please be sure to email me. And if you have any books, favorite books that you really like, and you like quotes and excerpt from them, please share them with me. I would love to hear. Email me at thedrivenintrovert@shepack.com. Thanks for listening to this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy this conversation, please take a moment to follow or subscribe to the podcast. I'd also love your feedback on this episode. You can scroll down on your app and click write a review. I'd love to read your takeaways from this conversation. As always, don't forget to take courage, trust God, and go pursue your big ideas. See you next time. The Driven Introvert is produced by shepack.com and Remy Roy. Want to ask a question or share a comment on a future episode? Click on the link in the show notes to record your question in a voicemail.